Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islam Explained. We have a very important topic to discuss today, and I have invited three academics, Dr. Zuleyha Keskin, Dr. Sulman Zadkaya, and our theologian and author, Omar Argi, and they are all from ISRA and Charles Sturt University. So I'd like to welcome you all first to the program.
Thank you for having us.
No worries. So our topic today is violence and peace. Some people claim that Islam is a religion of violence. So let me begin with you, Omar. What would your response to this claim be?
Well, that's an interesting question, Waisel. The short answer as a theologian, I would say, of course not. That would be the short answer. In fact, such a claim, I would think that it's preposterous. Because in reality, we know that Islam is a religion of peace, and this is stated in the Quran and in the Prophet's life as well. However, what do we mean by violence? This is important too. Are we talking about unnecessary violence, harming innocent people? Then we can certainly say that Islam does not condone any of these things or promote or endorse any of these things. In fact, what I believe is there are two groups of people who make this claim. And one group is the radicals, extremists themselves, who think that Islam is a religion of violence. And the other group is the Islamophobes. They think the same, along the same lines as well. In fact, there are many commonalities between them. Like, for example, accusing Islam of, violence. They use certain scriptures. They use, texts and tradition. But the methodology that they use is they cherry pick certain verses and things like that. And then they claim that it is a religion of violence. Unfortunately, most of these people who make these claims are not exegesis scholars. They do not understand the hermeneutics of the scripture. And as I said, they just cherry pick and decide, that Islam is a religion of violence. In fact, I do not think any religion in the world could be violent. But human beings, people can be violent, and it's a human reality. If we look at the history, human beings have always gone into battles, fought with each other, have had conflicts with each other. And I think the main reason why these conflicts and wars occur is, land, power, fame, dominion over others. These were the main reasons. I don't think religion is the main culprit here. And from an Islamic perspective, I say to myself, as I look at it from a theological perspective, how could Islam, which has a book called the Quran, divine revelation from God, and in this book, God himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, describes himself as Rahman and Rahim. In fact, at the beginning of 113 chapters, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim is mentioned in the name of the all-merciful, the all-compassionate. What does all-compassionate, all-merciful mean? There's no limits to his mercy and compassion. It's very interesting. Would such a God allow violence on other human beings? With his name, when it's a name, Rahman. In fact, people who really understand and embrace and live Islam according to it should be lived, you will see this behavior appear on them. I know of one scholar, contemporary scholar, who says, every time I see a leaf fall from its branch during autumn, it feels as if one of my arms are being amputated. I've seen a scholar who sat down and cried for hours because he could not save a bee from dehydration. So if you really understand Islam from a spiritual level as well, I don't think a person could be violent in that regards. But I'm not denying the fact that reality of wars and battles do exist in humanity in general. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Omar, for that explanation. We also talked about where people cherry pick some verses out of the Quran. I think they also take it out of context as well.
Yes.
And they use it to, their own wantings or achievements or whatever they want to achieve out of it, or whatever their political gain may be.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll hopefully move on to Dr. Zuleyha soon, but we'll move on to about spirituality. But we'll ask Dr. Suleiman here about the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him. I know that you're an expert in Sirah, the Prophet's biography. So what was the Prophet's approach to violence and extremism?
Well, thank you, Vaisal, for this question. It's really a broad question, and just to briefly mention prophetic stance against violence, in his entire life, in his entire prophetic career, which is recorded in Sirah sources, we clearly see that he preferred peace over violence in any circumstances. So, just to give you a brief overview of Sirah of the Prophet, as we all know, his prophetic career is 23 years, 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina. When we look at the Meccan period of his life, it is full of persecution and harassments from Meccan polytheists towards Muslims. They started with weak people, poor people, slaves, and gradually they spread this over to powerful people, including people like Abu Bakr and Uthman. They were kind of a leader among their tribes. So what was prophetic stance and what they were doing during this severe period of harassments? We clearly know that two of his great companions, Ammar's father and mother, his parents, they were even killed in a public sphere. So Prophet's advice for Ammar was patience, because the main theme of the revelation that is revealed during this period was focusing on certain themes, and patience was the central theme during that period. We don't see any scene in his Meccan period or any single evidence in his life in Mecca that he allowed his companions to retaliate or to respond to their violent acts. He always preferred peace over violence, as I said. And there are two shining examples during this period: the story of Abu Zar and the story of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. I'm not going to go into details of these two stories, but when they assume that they can do something and they can respond, especially in the case of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Prophet advised his companions to look for remote places to worship, because they received some kind of harassments from Meccan polytheists. So they actually secluded in a outside of the town, outside of Mecca, and they were worshipping. And a group of Meccan polytheists, they were passing by these individuals who were practicing their daily worship, and they started to tease these individuals. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he could not control his emotions, and he responded. Prophet was very upset, and he was quite clear, and he uncategorically prohibited any kind of retaliation or response, and asked them to stay in their houses. And even this development paved way to establishment of a house of Arqam, which Prophet, it was a prophetic kind of methodology. He was looking for a way to keep people away from this kind of conflicts and any kind of reactionary movement. So they established a house of Darul Arqam. So they were gathering together with his companions, and peacefully he was educating them, and also in another way he was keeping his companions in a safe atmosphere and not allowing them to involve any kind of conflict with non-Muslims. So he was a target, his companions were a target during this 13 years of kind of continuous harassments, but there is no evidence that they responded, and it was not there is no permission that is given to the Prophet they can respond. So they look for a way to keep away from these acts, and one way was migration, obviously. possibly the only way without resorting violence to exit this city peacefully, and that was also another way of a permanent solution for in this context. It was a permanent solution. It was exit to avoid from conflicts with non-Muslims. They first migrated to Abyssinia. It was a quite long journey. It was a long way distance from Mecca, so not everybody can afford this journey. Later on they migrated to Medina. Medina is the period that all battles took place in Prophet's life. It's actually, people mistakenly assume that in Mecca they were not powerful, so they forced to stay and keep calm during that time. But how about Medina? Medina is also another clear evidence for Prophet's stance against violence. We clearly know that he never ever instigated any battle. All battles in his life, as argued strongly by Abdurrahman Azzam, are defensive.
So, if I just ask you a very important and direct question, did the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, ever kill anyone?
Yeah, it is quite direct question. I think before we move on to this question, we can clearly give you an overview of that battles took place in Medina period in Prophet's life. So, after a year and a half, permission for war is given. It is granted by revelation. So this does not mean that they can do whatever they want. They can just go and fight. So when we closely examine Prophet's life and what happened after this permission, the first battle is Battle of Badr. All Meccans actually, they kind of attacked Medina, and the localities of each and every battle is a great example and evidence that he never attempted any battle. Badr is 130 kilometers away from Medina. On the other hand, it's almost 450 kilometers away from Mecca. Okay. Basically, it means they came all the way from Mecca towards Medina. Mm-hmm. Uhud is the second battle. It is occurred currently in the border of the city of Medina, within the city of Medina. And the third battle is we can come to this point, these battles, they have a significant importance in terms of time spent and what happened, what occurred during these battles. But the Battle of Khandaq, the trench, that also occurred in the border of the city of Medina, because they dig that trench around the city of Medina. So these are the main battles that took place in Prophet's life. And the final battle, which has an important physical confrontation with people, is the Battle of Hunain, which occurred right after the conquest of Mecca, because these people of Hunain, a tribe called Hawazin, they were afraid that the powerful city, the center of polytheism, is taken over by Muslims. So what is next? They assume they will be the next, and they gathered all their family members, their children even their animals, and they prepared for battle. When Prophet heard their news, so he marched towards them, and that battle occurred. Looking from the perspective of time spent in these battles, as I tried to explain, that all of them were defensive, and Prophet, he did not instigate, although he has received a revelation which gives permission for battle. But when we look at these battles, that physical confrontation took place in Prophet's life, that is quite important, because in Prophet's life there are around 80 military moves. I'm using moves intentionally because military expedition does not mean they really fought. They had that they shed blood and they have that confrontation. So there are around 80 military moves in Prophet's life. In those 80 moves, 13 of them Prophet he himself attended. Among these 13 battles, 3 of them are the only battles that actual physical fighting occurred. The Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, and the Battle of Hunayn. How long these battles took is Badr is around 3-4 hours, Uhud is around 5 hours, and Hunayn is around 3-4 hours maximum. How we know this? Because it is clearly recorded in classical seerah sources that deals with the biography of the Prophet, when it is started, when it is finished. So there are clear explicit evidences or indication in the sources when and how this occurred actually. So a close examination suggests that the all battles that took place in Prophet's life and he physically confronted with his enemies, they don't really amount to 15 hours. So it is not even a day.
So it's less than a day. And basically from what you're saying as well, they're pretty much all defensive when we look at all the evidence out there. So, sorry, continue on if you like.
Yeah, just to answer your question at the end,
Yes.
I was kind of sparing that question to the end. Did Prophet kill anyone, or what was his behavior during these battles? Briefly speaking about the Battle of Badr, which took place in 3 hours, Ali radiallahu anh, he says that I visited his tent 2 times and he was in sujood, in prostration, and he was supplicating. So this is his behavior during the battle. And when it comes to whether he killed anyone or not, he did not kill anyone. This is clearly known when you closely examine seerah sources. There is only one single event in his life, incident in his life, during the Battle of Uhud. The incident of Ubay ibn Khalaf, one of the prominent leaders of Mecca. He was actually captured during the Battle of Badr. He was a war capture and he paid ransom and returned to Mecca, and he promised himself that he is going to kill Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the only opportunity, the first opportunity actually, was the second battle, which is Uhud. Uhud is actually just Meccan's plan to take revenge of the previous battle, because Badr was quite decisive battle. So he attended the Battle of Uhud, and as you know, during the Battle of Uhud, although in the first stage Muslims were quite successful, but in the second phase of this battle, because of the genius act of Khalid ibn Walid, Meccans were quite successful, and they were even able to kill around 70 Muslims. So in one moment, Prophet was kind of alone. Very few individuals, companions were around him, and Ubay ibn Khalaf, he took his arrow and decided to march towards the Prophet and kill him. He was quite deliberate, and he was shouting, "Where is Muhammad? Show me, I'm going to kill him." So Prophet, there was a companion right next to him. He just captured his companion's arrow and intentionally did not really want to kill him. That's why he targeted his sides. So if he just threw the arrow and it just kind of touched upon his left or hand side, and that individual, Ubay ibn Khalaf, started to shout, "He killed me, he killed me." They said, "Look, this is a battlefield. Many people are wounded severely, but they are not shouting as you are shouting." He said, "There was an occasion in Mecca. One day I said to him, 'I'll kill you.' And he said, 'Maybe I.'" He did not say, "I will kill you." He said, "Maybe I." And I clearly know that this is a confession of that arch enemy of the Prophet. He said, I never ever witnessed that he lied. Since he said that maybe if he is going to spit on me today, I will die. And certainly, when they were returning back from the valley of Uhud towards Mecca, on their way back, he passed away.
From that graze that happened on his arm.
Who knows, whether because of that, because he wounded, or psychologically,
or maybe from other
he
things.
destroyed
he
himself.
Knew he would die.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Sudan. We'll move on to Dr. Zuleyha. Now, you have spoken and written on inner peace and the significance of ihsan, spiritual excellence in Islam. Do you think a person who attains this level, who is at peace with themselves, could display violent behavior or become radicalized?
I guess a short answer to your question is no. And if we look at these concepts that you mentioned in explaining why not, like when we think about ihsan, with spiritual excellence, or even the notion of excellence, like literally ihsan means excellence, and when we're defining it, it means that you're doing more than what your justice requires, because there's a notion of justice, and ihsan is where you give more than what's required. So there's this sense of generosity, there's this sense of giving that comes with this word of excellence. So when you're talking about spiritual excellence, it's this state of, I guess a high, a spiritual high, where you're very conscious of your every act. And when we look at the definition, it's this state where you, there's a hadith famously known as the Gabriel hadith, and towards the end it talks about how what ihsan is, and it is to worship as though you see God, and even if you can't see God, to know that He sees you. So it's this constant awareness that God sees you, He knows what you're doing, and therefore acting accordingly. And also, I guess when we're talking about ihsan or spiritual excellence, we're talking about a level of high spirituality where a person would be completely in check of their emotions, their intentions. Because again, this person would be doing what we call muhasabah, self-interrogation, muraqabah, self-supervision. So they're checking why they're doing what they're doing. And therefore, there would be a lot of sensitivity to not violate the rights of others. Whereas when you think about violence is about violating other people's rights. And when we look at also the notion of radicalization or radicals, in their narrative, there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of sort of vengeful thinking, vengeful talking, and those two don't go hand in hand. A person who's attained spiritual excellence, who's very conscious of themselves, their responsibilities towards others, a state where they want to give goodness more than what they receive, to then a radical or a terrorist who is terrorizing, violating other people's rights, giving out fear to other people, are two sides of, I guess, a spectrum. So therefore, someone who has attained a level of ihsan can't be a radical or a terrorist or violent.
Basically, what you're saying is when that person does achieve that level of ihsan, as though it's always being watched upon. So to do something wrong or to act in a violent behavior would also bother that person. So they're always self-interrogating themselves, also staying on the straight path. So I guess it's a very good, what you've just explained.
Can I just add though? I guess, when you think of it, someone who's got that radical mind will justify it with their religion. But I think in a way they're kidding themselves though. It's a justification, using the religion as a tool, as we heard, out of context to do what they want to do. Whereas if this person has reached that level of spiritual excellence, they know if they're justifying it. They know if they're trying to trick themselves and other people. There's a high level of sensitivity to their thinking and awareness of their surroundings. So they wouldn't be able to justify it as a radical would.
Yeah. So if I just ask you one last question, what impact does inner peace have on achieving peace on a global level?
That is a big question, and definitely I would argue that the two are linked. When we're talking about inner peace, we're talking about a state where my definition is that it's a state where you're aware, or you're able to give meaning to things around you in a way that satisfies your heart and mind. And an important part of that is a worldview where God is at the center of your worldview, what I call a Tawhid-centric worldview. So when you look at it that way, everything is given meaning in its place, and so it doesn't mean that you see everything as good. When you see something that's wrong, you say it's wrong. If it's black, it's black. But you're able to interpret that in a way that doesn't, I guess, cause anger or, again, that sort of vengefulness. It's an appreciation. There's wisdom. Like a person with inner peace has wisdom. They're able to understand why things are happening for the reason they are. And therefore, when a person attains that state of inner peace, there's a huge focus on the internal rather than the external. And it sounds like a paradox, but that internal focus benefits the external, because they're so absorbed with their own, say, development, their own faults, their own challenges, that they develop themselves. And as they improve, that only benefits other people, whether others replicate that then, or they learn from that person, or they don't get a negative backlash from that person, so they positive benefitly. So if a person is at that state of inner peace, they can't harm or cause damage or cause injustice to anyone because of that state. So it's complex, but there's a lot of other things like elements, like wisdom, that come with having inner peace, which need to be considered.
I'd like to thank our academics for putting their valuable information or contributing their valuable information today on the show. And I'd like to thank you all for watching Islam Explained. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.